Do you want to become an assistant principal? Have you been sitting in your classroom thinking, I just really need a change? I need to find something else to do. I've gone to school, I've got my degree, I'm ready to move up. I'm ready to change what I'm doing every day. I'm tired of the test scores, I'm tired of student behavior. I want to move so I can help the principal. Well, I'm Sherry Davidson, and I have been a school administrator or district administrator for over 22 years. I've hired many assistant principals for my school as well as sat on district committees who got to choose who moved forward in the possibility of being an assistant principal. So I'm here today to help you become an assistant principal. Now, first, I'm going to share my story because it's probably the most unusual way anyone can become an assistant principal, but it has so many lessons for you in it that we're going to talk about. I was teaching in my classroom. I taught third grade. The teacher assistant came to me and said, the principal wants to see you. I'm in the middle of a lesson now. And I told her, I said, okay, well, I have planning time at 10:30. I'll go down and talk to her then. And she said, no. She sent me down here. She wants to see you right now. Well, as a teacher, when you get called to the principal's office, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what have I done? I haven't said anything wrong. I haven't had a problem with a parent. I haven't had a problem with another teacher. What in the world, have I done? I was panicked. I went down there. Outside her office stood she and the assistant principal. And they said, come in. They closed the door and they said, sit down. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they're both in here. Something's really wrong. So she asked me, she said, Sherry, what are your professional goals? And I said, I love teaching. I don't ever want to do anything else. I never want to be an assistant principal. I never want to be a principal. I love what I do. And the two of them looked at each other and she said, well, forget your professional goals. I said, what are you talking about? She said, well, because our school has grown so large, we are going to get to have a second assistant principal. Now, this was 6 weeks into the school year, and I had only worked for this principal for 6 weeks. She was new to our school, but she told me this is an interim position. At the end of the year, you can go back to teaching. And I said, well, why me? I can't do that. I don't have an administrative degree. I've never had any interest in administration. She said, well, and this was several years ago. Keep that in mind. She said, you have a master's degree, and I've called central office, and that's all that matters is that you have a master's degree. You can do the job. And I said, but what about my 25 kids? I love my kids. And she said, well, I'm asking you to affect the lives of 900 kids instead of 25. And I said, well, I, I just don't, I don't know what to do. Why would you select me? There are people that I know that have the administrative degree. And she said, well, she said, I've been watching you since I've got here. She said, you have an excellent reputation in the community. She said, as a matter of fact, those 25 kids you're talking about, every single one of them was a parent request for you. So that tells me that you are an excellent teacher. You do a good job with your kids. The kids like being in your classroom. And not only that, you do a great job with parents because parents requested you. And she said, you volunteered to teach kids after school. You wanted to be a part of our tutoring program. You turned in your information as I requested that you were going to send home to your parents, that explained to them what your goals were, what the expectations were of the students, and how they'd be picked up. You had thought through every single um, part of that job, and you communicated it well to your parents. She said, so I I've just seen you do things that impressed me. And she said, not only that, I've been in your classroom. You're an excellent teacher. I see your kids learning, and I see you reinforcing and helping kids that are behind. She said, so actually, I guess you could say you've been auditioning for this job. It wasn't a job that I knew at the beginning of the year. That's why it's 6 weeks in. And so we will have to transition you out of that job, out of teaching, into administration. And so I want you to take this job. And I sat there and I was just dumbfounded, to be honest with you. Because, like I said, I never wanted to be an administrator. So I thought about it, and and she told me what the difference in salary would be. And back then, really, it wasn't that much. But she told me, she said, I really want you to do this. I know that you are the best person for the job. And so I said, okay. And, I really did it before I even told my husband. I went home and told him, well, I start a new job next week, and told him my story. Now, I tell you this story for multiple reasons. First of all, if you want to be an assistant principal, you've got to be a great teacher. When I was looking for assistant principals, that was my number one thing, because I was all about student achievement. I was as a teacher and I was as an administrator. So if you are an assistant principal, you will be doing evaluations on teachers. And if you can't tell them what they're doing wrong, how to improve, or what they are doing wonderful at, then you're not going to be a good evaluator. And so that was my number one thing. Also, I looked at, how did you interact with other staff members? Because that's another thing she said to me. She said, when I'm in the lounge and you're in there, you're not talking negative. You're not going to talk negative when the principal's in there, let's be honest. But she said, you were engaged in discussions about kids in your room, asking other teachers, hey, they didn't get this. How'd you teach it today? She said, you were all about instruction. And it wasn't, you're telling a story about gossip or running someone else down. You're worried about your students. And that stuck out with me. She said, you get to work early every day, and you leave late. And that's what you have to do when you're an assistant principal. You have to get to work early, because it's long days and it's nights. You have to come to nighttime events. So if you're a teacher that gets there when it's your assigned time, and you leave when it's your assigned time, that shows the principal you're really not all in. And another thing is, like she said, I worked really hard on communication with parents. I didn't necessarily want parents to, quote, like me as much as I wanted them to be my partner. They knew that we were working together to help their child. And that's the same with administration. You have to be able to work with parents to let them know, hey, I know you have a situation here. I'm going to help work through that with you because I know your child is the most important thing to you. And I would even say that as a teacher and as an administrator. Look, I know this is your baby. We're going to make this happen. We're going to work together to figure out a solution. And so that's another part of being a good assistant principal. You have to know, you have to know your students too. And she told me, you can tell me who your smart kids are, you're very tip top, and you can tell me who is struggling in your classroom. You know every single one of them. She said, as an administrator, we have to know that as well so we can help everyone. So, another thing they look at, or we looked at as um, people wanting to be assistant principals, is how did they know their data? Could they share what they were doing? Um, could they come up with solutions? Another thing she told me was I was solutions based. I was always looking for a better way to do things. Now, this lady only knew me 6 weeks, and I, like I said, had no desire to be an assistant principal. I was doing my job teaching, wanting what was best for my students. But these things she saw in me got me a job that I really didn't apply for. So, those of you that really, really want to be an assistant principal, I want you to take some knowledge from that story, in that if you're doing it because you want to get out of teaching, that's not the reason to do it. And it shines through when you're doing your interview. It will come across that you really want to just get out of teaching. And you know, she was only my principal for 6 weeks when she asked me to do the job. Your principal is watching you. She's looking for the next leader in her building. Because let's face it, people retire, people move. There will be an assistant principal opening at some point, and you want to be the one that can fill that role. Well, if you haven't shown your leadership abilities, then you're not going to get the job. That's the most important part, is thinking like an administrator. I was thinking like an administrator and I didn't even realize it, to be honest with you. So I had to go back and get my uh, master's degree in administration, another master's degree. I already had one, because at the end of that year, one of the teachers in my building had seen how I worked as an assistant principal. Her husband was actually a principal in the district and had an assistant principal opening. So she told him about me. She said, "Oh, you need to hire Sherry because she does a great job." And she sold him on me. So yes, I had to go through the interview process for that job, but basically I got the job on her recommendation and on my work. So I say all these things to tell you it's about the work you do as a teacher and your leadership in the building that's going to get you an assistant principal job. Because if you're good in those areas, your principal's going to go to bat for you. Even if you um, don't get a job in your school. When I was going to the second school, of course, he called my principal and said, "Hey, I know Sherry worked for you this year. Tell me the positives and the negatives of her working with you." And I don't know, the exact conversation, but I know my principal at the time told me he called, and she told me, "I gave you a glowing recommendation." So that's how it works. Your leadership style as a teacher will totally affect you becoming an assistant principal. Now, I'm going to do some more videos on this topic. I'm going to do a video that actually questions I use in the interview process for assistant principal, because I think that's important for you to be prepared for the interview, since your way of becoming an assistant principal will be much different than mine. So please subscribe, stay tuned. We're going to get you an assistant principal role together. I can help you solve your problem. And so please like and subscribe, and I will talk to you soon.